Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I'm your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. I have been talking to David for probably several weeks now. He has a great background, great understanding of all things. But for the sake of you, the audience, David is an expert in probably disaster resilience in the finance sector is probably what is the best way to describe it. You're going to hear a lot about him and his background, his perspectives on this show. Again, we try to bring all different types of angles of leadership. Disaster resilience is definitely one of those, specifically for financial sectors. It's an election year, so everybody's freaking out about finance, as always, but especially this year. So it's nice to be able to talk to somebody who kind of understands that world. And with that, we'll bring him onto the show. David, thanks for joining me.
Hey, John, great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for the sake of the audience, can you just give kind of a brief background of who you are, what you've done, those kind of things?
Yeah, John, I've spent the last 15 years in financial services, primarily focusing on business resilience and disaster recovery. And really all that means is just helping our company when something goes bump in the night, which you never know when something's going to happen, that we've got plans in place, that we know how to execute those plans, and we can recover our business so we can resume operations for our clients and shareholders. And so that's really what I've been doing for the last 15 or so years at several financial institutions here in the U.S.
So when you're talking about things that go bump in the night, so what is something that would go bump in the night for you in your world?
Well, you know what? This week's a great example. Hurricane Debit, right? So we deal with a lot of geographic type weather events, natural weather disaster events. So this week's a good example of where we'd be, one, looking out for our teammates, two, trying to understand business impacts as the hurricane rolls into Florida and then up the East Coast, and then how do we resume business and then support our clients, in particular those in the region that may need access to money and cash and things to begin the recovery of their lives. So that's a good example. Another example in financial services is cybersecurity. So I think we were talking about this in our last conversation, the issue we had a couple weeks ago. That wasn't really a cyber event, but it was related to some groups that provide software to help with cyber, and there were some issues there that created some outages that would have impacted a lot of industries. So cybersecurity is another example, or just a technology outage where some of the technology that we use through our operations goes down, and you have to have the right disaster recovery plans in place to recover the application so business can resume. So several examples that we deal with all the time in financial services.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400P radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400P radio at l3harris.com right now. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today.
CBRNE Convergence, the world's largest conference for the non-conventional threat, is heading back to Orlando between October 28th and 30th, 2024. With 3 days of workshops, lectures, and interactive sessions delivered by speakers from around the world on the latest issues and approaches to CBRNE and hazmat. Make sure to claim your early bird discount by registering now at cbrneworld.com/event/Orlando.
There's two problems with the incidents like what happened with CrowdStrike. And the one is serious and the one is very annoying, and it's like funny, but it's annoying. The very serious is livelihoods, business impact, the financial impact, operations, trying to get from A to Z, all the things that are so associated with like normal, I wouldn't say normal, but all the real impacts. But the one that's very annoying is I have about 10% of my friends. I say that with a lot of love, who are just pure conspiracy theorists. And so anytime any kind of disruption happens, I not only have to deal with all of my, other friends calling me up and say, hey, can you help me kind of walk through this problem set? We're doing this, or just hear what they're dealing with. But I also start getting the memes. I start getting like the world's ending, the aliens have been,
Right.
It's like, oh no. So for CrowdStrike, I blame you for making me get those memes. But on the serious end, it does show it doesn't have to be a foreign actor trying to do an EMP and just taking down systems. It could be as simple as, ironically, having no kind of business resiliency and doing, kind of an update, right? And if
Right.
people, for me, like the negligence comes in thinking of, you have financial sector, we had commercial transport, you had, oh my gosh, I could go on and on, but really the two big ones that everybody's talking about were those in the news. And to think to think that a system could even mess up all of that at the same time, like it's not parceled out in their data. And it got me nervous that, like, some random day someone's going to do select all delete on a spreadsheet, and
Right.
we're going to lose everything. The only positive is if we did lose everything, my student loans would be gone, and you got to win there. But when you're looking at that and you're reviewing a situation like that, what are the top level things that you as an organization have to start worrying about in that situation? Saying situation a lot there.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, right? You always have to learn lessons when things happen. Sometimes they don't happen to you directly as an organization, but there are things out, in the industry or other industries, and you want to take those and really work those into your planning process. And one of the things that not just financial institutions, but a lot of companies now rely very heavily on third parties, whether it be third party operations or third party applications and systems and platforms. And so as a part of your third-party process, you need to feel comfortable that those that you're working with have the right controls in place, right, to one, not have an issue when they're putting code in that creates a larger issue, and two, can they recover if they have an issue? And so those are a lot of the things that we look at from a business resilience perspective is the reliance on third parties, one, making sure they have the right controls to recover, and two, what's your plan C? It's not enough to just assume your third party or supplier is going to come back up. If they can't, what do you do next, right, in the cycle? Are there things that you can do manually that maybe you only can do 30% of the work capacity-wise? So what's your most critical work, and how do you keep your business moving with the most critical work until you can fully recover working with that third party? So those are some exercises that, dating back to SolarWinds, the end of 2020, I believe, that we really started taking a closer look at all the third parties that we're dependent upon on some of our critical processes, and what are we going to do if they're hard down to continue to operate our business. It's not easy. You know this, John. It's not easy that if you have a third party that performs an outsourced service for you, it's not just as easy sometimes to switch over to another third party. That takes time. So what are you going to do to recover from a mishap to allow you to operate your business, even if it's as I said, smaller capacity, less capacity of most critical work?
Yeah, most people don't know this, but I was an economics major before I switched over to emergency management. Worst financial choice you could ever make, by the way, so don't suggest that for anybody. But I still remember looking at case studies about moving industries during World War II, and they struggled in the beginning when they were moving industries because they thought it would be a one-for-one. This has metal sheeting, metal factory. This has metal sheeting, metal factory, worker B, and there was always a loss. And unfortunately, I'm blanking on the term, but the transfer of things, even if you think it's one for one, even if you think you have the competency or the skill or really the resource, the assets, it never transfers exactly. And I think about that law of transferables in emergency management, because so many people in leadership roles they talk about being in a leadership role, or they talk about being in emergency management, or they talk about this or that. But when it switches over from blue sky to gray sky, or if they were a fire chief and police chief and now they're having to be an emergency manager, like they think it's the same skill sets, but there's always a loss. Training is one way to overcome loss. We have diminishing skills for sure. If you're looking at building out an organization and you know that your people are going to inherently have to switch things over, whether it's during something like the CrowdStrike disaster or that other thing that goes bump in the night, they're obviously shifting from A to B.
Yeah.
How do you enhance competency during that shift?
Well, certainly as you build your team, before you ever get to that crisis scenario where you're trying to recover the business, as you build out your team, you want to have people with some expertise, in those areas. So our organization, the last organization that I led, we aligned our organization to a lot of the regulatory requirements that financial services are under. So there was certain planning that you needed to do from a business perspective, certain skill set there. Disaster recovery was more technology and technical. We had individuals that had more technology backgrounds there that could challenge plans, for the business owner, make them better, right? Do some of the QC on the plans.
Yeah.
And then we had folks that really were experts in crisis so that they could manage our framework. And so, we did try to get specific skill sets for those particular areas. But I can tell you this week with Hurricane Debbie, it would be all hands on deck. Now, this wasn't a huge storm. I mean, we've dealt with bigger storms, but the process would be the same. Your day-to-day work kind of stops. You're not really doing planning activities. You're really focused on recovering from whatever that incident is, and somebody that does planning might be called upon to help out on some of the crisis work. It's maybe ad hoc activities you need to go do to address the situation. So, when it's blue skies, as I said, people have kind of their day job. And then when you get into that gray sky, there's a crisis or an incident you're dealing with. A lot of times your day job goes away and you may be helping in another way, or on the crisis side of the organization, those that are leading an incident. So we try to do training, as you said. That's one way to deal with it. We give people opportunities to shadow some of their teammates and learn other areas. We also typically do an enterprise exercise in most of the organizations I've been involved with. And so you really learn a lot from your hot wash or lessons learned. You play out the scenarios, and then you can use that in your planning process. We've tried to use lessons learned from live events, as well as, the lessons learned from exercises to improve our planning process, to improve, the recovery. And in some cases, it does uncover, to your point, where maybe we need to add either capacity or a specific skill set, either in our organization or somewhere within the broader organization, to better respond, the next time you have an incident of that type.
One of the coolest things I've seen from our course, Dynamic Populations, is we got, I want to say, a letter. It was a short email. And so I ended up calling the guy and asking him more about it. But he had walked through the entire course is dealing obviously with a very specific problem set. But at its core is a leadership and interoperability course designed specifically for people who've already been doing the job. It's not really supposed to be introductory. However, he had talked about how he and his group had been operating in a silo, and for the inherent nature of bringing in DoD, private sector, hospitals, airlines, public safety emergency managers, all these different types of people who are looking at the same problem in a very different way. He learned that he needed to do his planning process much more efficiently when he got home. And they ended up having a big disaster. And because he had done all this extra work to try to find every fringe group possible that was going to be impacted by one of his decisions, he was exponentially more successful in that event. Yeah. And, a big fan of training, obviously, but I'm a big fan of trying to find, as he had called out, these fringe areas that are impacted by what we're doing, because they can accomplish a job that you would have to do if you didn't know about them. And that streamline effect by bringing everybody together to, almost like, weaving something together so it's much more resilient, funny enough, is a fascinating concept as you're talking about. The reality in my world versus your world is one of the big differences is scale. I mean, in a financial sector, you're talking about a global impacts if things happen. From a leadership standpoint and talking about a global impact and the resiliency of that, whether it's Debbie that's going through right now, or it's, I don't know, global pandemic, whatever it may be, supply chain getting interrupted in Panama, whatever it may be, from a leadership standpoint and those bump in the nights happen, how do you handle that stress? What are some of the things that you do that you could pass on to other people?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to recognize you can't do it all yourself, right? You have to build a strong team around you. And so that's one of the things I've always tried to do is hire people smarter than me and hire people with different backgrounds, right, that complement each other when you think about the broader task and mission of the organization. So, you still have the ultimate accountability, but if you bring the right people in on the team, you have a common goal, and you provide strategic direction and empower them to go do the work. I mean, there's a lot you can get accomplished across the organization. And so that's how I've always approached it. I think last time we talked a bit about servant leadership. To me, it's about equipping the team, setting the goalpost, and then empowering them to do the work. And that means giving them the right stretch assignments so they can grow. It's a learning from at times when things don't go well, you learn from it, and it's having all the conversations, the good conversations when things go well, and sometimes tough conversations so people can grow and learn. But you have to be able to share your knowledge across the team and actually learn from the team that you've built, because they are experts in the area that you've pulled together to really accomplish that goal. And so I'm not going to say it doesn't get stressful at times when you get into these situations and you're trying to recover your business or you got teammates you're accounting for. But when you have the right people on the team and you have the right framework and structure, you were talking about having that broader team. That was kind of how we set up our response structure to make sure we had representation across all business units, all support functions like corporate security, HR, involved in our assemblies when we would have a response team assembly, so that we're sharing information out. We can get information on impacts. That information can be aggregated to leadership, right? If there are decisions that need to be made at C-suite, and then you can disseminate that information back out. And so it's really kind of a hub and spoke, if you will. My team centrally managing, working with various business units. But back to the original question, it really starts with the leaders you build on the team, and then the teams that they build, right, and empowering all the way down through the organization. And that's how you get more done, and that's how the breadth and scope can continue to do more when you bring the right people into the organization.
In the emergency management response for dynamic populations course, you'll master the art of managing large, diverse populations, like those at schools, hospitals, amusement parks, or stadiums. These scenarios demand rapid, adaptable responses where command and control, evacuation, mass care, medical transport and triage, public messaging, and counter-Sebring considerations are all put to the test. From October 22nd through 24th in Pueblo, Colorado, you'll dive into DIPOP training with the capstone Hot Mess Express exercise, taking on the role of an emergency manager as you lead your organization through chaos of a catastrophic train derailment. This high-intensity experience will push your skills to the limit as you work to protect and coordinate these ever-changing populations. Get ready to elevate your readiness in the most complex dynamic environments with DIPOP 2024. Class size is limited. Sign up today at thereadinesslab.com. Let me shift gears here a little bit. As you're talking about that, we're talking about bumps and nights and dealing with stress and having the right people around you and all these things. The word people keeps coming into my mind because you look at internally, you got your people, but I would assume that the financial industry, probably more than some, really has to be aware of how the general population is going to react to things. You know, I saw this thing on CNN, then I saw it on Fox, and so I was seeing it on both, and I'm like, okay, if I see it on both, that's what I'm like, uh-oh. Because if it's one or the other, who cares? Something like it said Warren Buffett has, at the time of this recording, right, has like dropped all of his stock at Apple, and he has like $273 million of cash that he's just sitting on, or $1 billion of cash, whatever he's sitting on. And the people are afraid of a recession. And because of that, when you're dealing with like business resiliency, and some billionaire one day decides to sell some stock, which causes everybody to freak out, and you're watching the markets go up and down, whether there's real fears to that or not, or perceived fears, I should say, how do you have to deal with that on your world at all, or is that something typically outside your scope?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm not the expert in that area that would look at credit risk and some of the market volatility and things of that nature. But we have people in our organization that do. And so I do work with those individuals as a part of our broader framework. So we built out a framework that covers most what I would call incident types. I hit some of the more common ones earlier, like cyber, weather, natural disaster, and technology. But we did have a team we called it the financial systemic team. And essentially, they were dealing with a lot of the financial aspects of resilience and funding our company and market volatility. So think back to last year, I guess it was about a year ago, in that February, March of 2023, when Silicon Valley Bank failed. That drove a ton of market volatility that we were having to deal with. And so our experts that kind of know that incident type and debt and equity funding and all the things that they do, in our finance organization, they were kind of on point to watch and make sure if there were any levers we needed to pull to deal with market volatility or contingency funding or things of that nature, that they were on point. And then if there were impacts throughout the organization or to a particular business unit, my team was helping coordinate a broader response, but leveraging those experts. So tangentially, yes, I'm involved with it, but we have experts at the bank that, deal with those kind of funding questions that come with market volatility. So it's part of our broader framework, and we help coordinate, but they're really the experts in that area, in that case.
Yeah, I guess from my angle, I'm thinking about like people running on banks and protests and like doing something stupid, essentially.
Yep.
And how do we protect against that from, I really do believe that everything's interconnected. When you're talking about a team that's talking about financial protection of the company, you're talking about security issues, and you're talking about public relations, that all comes back. If one group fails on one of those, it becomes a nightmare for everybody. And I think, again, pulling out of this silo concept, I've been trying to help emergency managers and really their counterparts, whether they're local level all the way to the top, is try to pull out of this silo perspective. From you, we're looking at, the time here, and I want to make sure I get into this a little bit. You've already had such a successful career, and you're still going at it, obviously. From the lessons learned in leadership, just trying to switch gears here a little bit. What are some of the big things that you've learned, whether they're common or uncommon, that we really need a stark reminder about today?
Yeah, look, for me, when you're looking at individuals in your team, and myself included, I've always tried to approach my career as a business person that happens to be doing resilience, or a business person that, prior to joining financial services, I was in supply chain and had, part of a career there, but I was a business person, right? So I've always tried to understand the business that I'm working in, right? The industry and the business, and then apply whatever discipline or function that I happen to be in. Most recently, it's been business resilience, disaster recovery, crisis management. But I kind of look at it in that lens. And then the second thing I've always tried to do is make sure that I, learn from those that are around me. leaders in the organization that I engage with that, I see emulate certain leadership skills or the way they communicate or how they do, try to, build a relationship there or learn how to model what they're doing. And that's probably more of a less formal thing, but formally figure out those areas around business resilience or new things that are out there, right? What's the latest thing that's out there right now? Machine learning, artificial intelligence. So how do you keep up with those things so that as business evolves, you can evolve the function, that you're in and continue to deliver the results for the company that you need to deliver. And so I've had informal means of doing that where I watch people, and you and I talked about this before. Sometimes, as much as nobody wants to have a bad leader that they work for, I've learned as much sometimes from a leader that's not a great leader. Maybe they're new, maybe they're just not a good leader, but you learn a lot of things what not to do when you get into your next leadership position, sometimes more so than good leaders, because you don't always realize what a good leader is doing, and then you get to the end result. Many times you do, but I think you have to learn from those that are around you and build those relationships, be willing to take honest feedback, and be open to honest feedback, but then also leverage some formal ways to do that. That's what I've tried to do in my career. And also, not be afraid to take a chance and move into another area that maybe you're not as familiar with. And I took that leap about 12, 15 years ago, where I went into more business continuity, with DR, had not really been in that space, had been more in an operational role. And so, you get out of your comfort zone a little bit, you have to learn, and that helps you grow as well. And so those are probably three things I've done over the years that try to continue to move the ball down the field, so to speak, on my career.
The good leader, bad leader thing, I remember I was talking about that. I've been very fortunate to have some really great leaders, absolutely amazing people that I would follow into the gates of hell kind of thing. And I know how I have only one that I would help chuck them off that cliff to help them get them there. That guy was the worst. But, I walked out of that situation after a year and a half. This is the other thing that people, when they get a bad leader, they bail so fast. People don't quit jobs over the job. They quit bad over the. But I dealt with this guy for over a year and a half. Hated every single day working with him. Just thought he was the worst. But I didn't give up. And I did end up learning a lot. Not from him, as in I wanted to be like him, but making sure I didn't fall into the same pitfalls. And I would say as a small business and building my team, one, I'm pretty lucky because I get to choose the incredible people that are around us and that are smarter than me, by the way. Don't tell them that too often. But the other thing is I'm much more empathetic as a leader, and I have such more of a long view of people. And I try to give them ample opportunities to, there's lines you can't cross, obviously, but just because somebody messes up doesn't mean they're a bad person or they're weak or incompetent. It just means that there could be a learning moment if they're able to learn. And I want to give those opportunities to people now. But whoever that old boss is, and I hope he does listen, I'm more than happy to still shove him off that cliff. That's funny. Well,
you make a good point there about the empathy component of it, because you were talking about the journey that I've been on from a leadership perspective. When I got out of college and you get kind of your first role, I learned that I was very formal, right? It was all about the work, right? Because it's what you're taught in the textbooks and everything else, right? Efficiency and it took me a few years to realize that leadership's about people, right? And how do you motivate people to get the work done, get them excited about the work, and started reading a lot of books about leadership over the years. It's been one of my passions. I've got so many books about leadership and just different aspects of it. And one of the things that has stuck with me over the years is, as I continue to evolve, is when I've taken over teams and gotten to know people don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that whole concept of kind of servant leader, understanding them as a person and kind of building that relationship on more than just work level. And some people are more open to it than others, and that's okay. but they need to know you're open to it and that you have their best interests at heart when you're trying to make decisions for the organization or help them with their career. So that one has stuck with me for a long time now, that concept, and it really ties into the whole servant leader concept that we talked about a little earlier in the podcast.
In fact, I think that's probably the perfect way to make this full circle, is like ending that. It's funny enough that a lot of the really, I would say, expert leaders that I've had on here, they've all come back to that servant leadership thing. The ones that I look to as my mentors, especially, they're still alphas. They're still that A-type personality. They want to get the job done. But I do feel like they know me as a person. They care about me. And if I feel like they didn't, they can go pound sand, right? And so, but it goes both ways too. For that person who's working under a leader that maybe need to get better, or they're working in a small organization or whatever, you also have to give the leadership person some time to grow as well. And so it does go both ways. But either way, David, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me and sharing your insights. I hope we can have you back on the show sometime, and we'll see you down the road.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. If you got something out of this episode, which you should have, because it's a great episode, give us that 5-star rating and subscribe. Make sure that if you have a question for David, specifically about resiliency in the financial industry, for example, you can always send us an email at contact@thereadinesslab.com. You can forward it on to David, or put something on social media of a good lesson you've learned. And with that, we'll see you for the next one. Peace.